Are you ready to get intimate? What is intimacy? And where and how do you find it? Welcome to the Getting Intimate podcast, a daring journey into the heart of intimacy with you, your senses, the whole world, and all the creatures in it. Intimacy can be a pretty wild ride, filled with both longing and apprehension. But what if the vulnerability of intimacy isn't something to be avoided, but celebrated? What if getting intimate is the key to finally coming alive? Discover more with guests from all walks of life and your host, Katarina. Welcome to this new episode of the Getting Intimate podcast. And this time we're going bathing deep in the forest, exploring a form of ecotherapy that is available everywhere where there's a collection of trees. And as our guide, I've invited Mark Reeves, who is a forest therapy guide and who I've actually had the privilege of going bathing with in the forest. So welcome, Mark.
Hi, Katarina. So nice of you to have me. I love the introduction. It's so true what you're saying. It does slightly give the impression of bathing of everyone in their swimming
Yeah.
trunks in the forest.
What if you start by talking about what is forest bathing?
Yeah, well, it translates from Japanese expression, and the bathing, and it's just immersion. It's nature immersion in the forest. And it's exactly what it sounds like in a way. It's a time to be in nature, but really dropping deep. So your senses are opening. It's like going for a walk, but much, much more than when we normally go for a walk. Because we can go for a walk and be quite disconnected. So it's a level of mindfulness, a level of awareness that we bring to really enjoying being in nature.
Well, so I think a lot of people, if you describe it to them, it really sounds like just taking a walk in in nature a little bit longer.
Yeah,
Maybe they get that it's silence, but could you describe some of like the key elements that actually makes it different than just
yeah.
going for a walk?
Yeah, well, when we go for a walk, that can be lovely, whether it's walking our dog or just going for some exercise. I mean, that in itself, you're halfway there already. But the thing is, we can still go for a walk and be in our normal mode. And what I mean by our normal mode is maybe we just walk very fast. We think, oh, this is good for me. I'm getting exercise. But are we actually really slowing down, becoming much more aware? So the forest bathing has a series of invitations, instructions, which could range from anything from just sitting very quietly on one spot, maybe under a tree, for example, and just being still, just letting yourself really tune in, listen, look, take in the scents, the smells, take in what you're hearing, the feeling of warmth of the sunlight on our skin or the wind on our skin. Those things that are there anyway, but maybe we're not quite noticing. So it could be something as simple as that, or just lying down even on the ground, or wandering around, but with an openness and playfulness, receptivity. So that's really the essence of it.
Well, and it's what you're describing is also activating all our senses or
Uh,
using all our senses to becoming more present and more aware.
yeah.
And when we did this walk, I really noticed like in the beginning, it was more like a normal walk. And in
Mm,
the end, there was this sense of really like sinking into the forest, becoming one with the forest. And I noticed
yeah.
that while in the beginning, people were more like, it was raining a little bit. So people were more like careful with their clothes. It was a little wet. But
Mm,
at the end, everybody was kind of like laying around, rolling on the wet moss. And there was
mm,
none of that, like the kind of like the difference between the, what would you say, like the, I can't even find the word now. Less of a difference between nature and civilization, I guess. It kind of had blurred that. And I know you
Yeah,
talked a bit about surrendering. So could
yeah.
you describe a little bit what happens? Like, how does that line blur between
Well,
the civilized human and the forest?
so you're talking about something that can be really subtle.
Yeah.
There's this subtle drop that happens, but that drop can also be very profound. It can be very gentle, and it can also be very deep. And I sometimes think of it as there being like a barrier. We're not even aware of the barrier. And you gave
Mm.
the example of being in the rain. That's a really good example because, especially in the rain, there's a barrier. The barrier is just, I don't want to get wet,
Yep.
right? Or your survival instinct is to huddle, is to try and avoid the environment. But even if there's no rain, that's the case anyway. There's a barrier of, maybe it's like we don't want to get dirty. If I encourage people to touch the ground, and the forest floor, particularly in Sweden, is so diverse and rich, and it's like a whole unto itself to be explored. But people often have this sense of a barrier. So to make the invitation for that barrier to soften takes a little while. So people start out and they're enjoying it. Oh, it's nice, but there's still this kind of barrier between nature and me, of the separation, which I think is what you're
Yeah.
alluding to.
Yeah.
And then gradually, and it can take a little while, but even within, say, an hour and a half's session, maybe towards the end, there's a certain point where that barrier starts to melt or dissolve, and people are, I'm, like you said, you're really part of it. You are one with nature, whether that's just opening to the rain or just enjoying being there in a different kind of way to how we would usually be there. And yeah, it is a quality of surrender. And surrender, in the way I'm describing there, just means an openness, a vulnerability, and a letting go. So you are softening and letting yourself open to the environment. And then, yes, you are part of the environment. As much as a tree or a creature, you have a right to be there, and you're part of it.
What have you found happens with people when they go bathing in the forest, or when they go dropping into the forest? Like what comes up, what lets
Well,
go?
what comes up can actually be quite challenging, because if you are, for example, living your life in a way where you're quite stressed, maybe there's a lot of turbulence, emotional distress, and that's all kept just beneath the surface because that's what we do. We just get on with it, right?
Yeah.
You can easily go for quite a long time in our life with just pushing through. If you take people out into nature and ask them to just stop and be, then that level of protection, or that lid we put on everything, it's harder to keep that on. Because as you become still, all of the things that have been kept at bay start to be felt. So very often people will maybe feel a little bit tearful, or they'll initially notice all the pent-up tension that's already been there starting to be more coming into consciousness. So that's where it can be very healing, because it's the environment, the forest becomes the container to support you in facing whatever is there.
You described it as the drop. So what are we dropping into?
Yeah, what are we dropping into, or what is dropping away, might be another way of saying it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's both of those things. Something of our civilized life is dropping away, and that can happen, even within an hour and a half's forest bathing session. Already something is falling away of how we hold ourselves, and the forest just supports that and encourages us to let something of that rigidity soften. So there's something falling away, and the drop is the difference between, say, yes, this is nice, I'm enjoying it, like when we go for a walk, and you think, oh yeah, I love the sight of the trees, it looks lovely, I'm enjoying the view. You can have all of that, but you still retain your separation. That makes sense.
Yes.
There's another level where it's beyond just enjoying it, like, isn't it a nice view? You drop down into becoming part of it. And it's kind of hard to describe how that happens. There's no recipe for it or formula. But if you just keep giving the invitations and keep opening the door, people are hungry to walk through that door without even knowing that they have that hunger. Because there's a natural pull towards what is very natural for us.
Do you have a sense that this is kind of like from our evolution or from how we used to live, closer to nature? Do you have a sense of that kind of like connection to the past or?
For sure. And I know there's so much said at the moment in these times about our disconnect from nature, of course, and how far we've come from that place of our natural place in the world. And of course, all the examples of how much we're on our phones, how much we live in cities perhaps, how much we are disconnected. And with that can come this kind of callback to earlier times. I'm not so sure that necessarily, it's about the answer that we have to go back to some time before, before the Industrial Revolution or even further back as the answer. But I do feel that something has definitely got lost that we can reclaim, even if we're living in a city.
So say time wasn't an issue. I know so often in life, like time is an issue, but what if time is an issue? It's a Saturday, they don't have anything else they want to do that day. How long would you take? Like how long would
give
you
yourself
say?
the whole day?
Oh.
I'd say give yourself the whole day. If you can treat yourself to that, or a half day. Because it does take that little time for that drop to happen. Otherwise, what happens is you go in, you look around and you come out, but nothing's changed. So a true forest bathing session means something's actually changed in you. Now that might be very, very subtle, but you come away feeling like, oh, I'm in a different place to where I was. So you've allowed something to be touched.
Is there any I would say any example from this that you found surprising, when you've been doing this over the years? Like, is there any change or any experience somebody had that really surprised you?
The first thing that comes to mind as you say that was on an individual one-to-one nature-based therapy session. And there was a guy who, I think he'd been only once before. So this was his second session. And he was walking along, he was talking about some things in his life. He was very distracted and he was walking very fast. I was finding it hard to keep up with him. And at one point I was thinking, some ways we could be doing this indoors. He's not even looking around. He's not even taking in the nature. He's just in his own world. And then right towards the end of the hour, he suddenly walked over to a tree. He leaned forward so that his forehead was touching the tree, and he just started sobbing. And it was all the grief around the death of his father coming out. But the tree had, given him that space for that to happen. And that was a great example to me of how interactive nature can be. And how actually I had misread it, because I was thinking, in fact, it was really working at a very deep level. He might not have been aware of it, but the drop had happened. He was dropping in, and then that enabled that to happen for him.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The other, surprising, maybe it's not so surprising to me really, but it's just very beautiful, you mentioned about the rain, but there was a time in the UK where we had a session, pouring rain. It was like, and I think about 10 people were booked onto that session. And when we actually got there, I checked my phone, one after another was all these messages saying, oh, I'm very sorry. something very important has suddenly come up, I can't make it. And it got reduced to about, I think, 4 people turned up, all wearing their rain clobber. And it was so beautiful, and people were so touched by it. And they were just enjoying the experience of just opening to the rain. That was,
Letting go of all the resistance and reaction to getting wet or being in the rain, and
exactly,
just like welcoming the rain instead.
welcoming the rain. And one woman from that session came back about a year later on a really beautiful day, and in the sharing circle that we had, she was saying, "Oh, this is really great of you, but I so much preferred the time when it was raining."
So one of the things that you and I briefly talked about was when my mom passed away, I think it's like 8 or 9 years ago now, my dad, I asked him how he processed the grief. And he said that for him, the main way to process the grief was to take really long walks in the forests. And I've always remembered that because I didn't really, he's not a religious man. He's not a very spiritual man. And yet nature for him seems to be what gives him that sense of something bigger. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how nature and ecotherapy or forest therapy can actually assist in processing those big emotions, kind of like grief.
Well, it's perfect because I don't know about in your dad's case, but for someone who doesn't have a connection to a religious faith, nature is not associated with, you could be a complete atheist, doesn't matter. For some people, going into a church will have that effect because it links them to something bigger to do with their faith or whatever faith that would be. But nature is a beautiful space where you don't have to have any affiliation with any religion, and yet it opens that big place up, as it did in your father's case. And it is naturally healing because this might be happening unconsciously, but as you look around, you can see life and death. You see the little saplings, the growth, you can see trees that have fallen over, that have died. It's just so obvious that there's a cycle. And in the seasons. So everything is encompassed in terms of life and death, cycles in nature. And by immersing ourselves in that, that is going to be reflecting something about the nature of cycles and passing on. And of course, the healing of grief is really about coming to terms with cycles. That's what's underlying it.
I remember when we did this, I was laying on the moss and it was raining, little tiny raindrops that fell on my face. And I was watching this spider slowly going through the air. Well, it had a little thread that it was like, but it was like, and I could just watch it because I was there for such a long time. So, and it went from one tree to another tree, like just slowly moving. And there was such a sense of wonder.
But if that what you're saying there is beautiful, because if something else could see us, could see you just walking up the stairs in your life or making a cup of tea, that something else might experience that same quality wonder that you experience with the spider. In other words, it's there, you're seeing it represented in the spider, externalized, but that's a reflection of the wonder of existence, of our own movements. But what you're seeing in the spider's movement perhaps is something where there's a grace, because it's in its true movement. We're often in a movement that is out of alignment of our true movement. So then we see the beauty in that, because the spider, because it's representing, it's in its true movement. It's not distracted by anything. It's just
it's
doing
totally
what it needs
present.
to do.
It's totally present. It's totally congruent with its spider, its spider nature moving over. Yeah. That's beautiful. What would you say, like, just as a key message to people, like if somebody's wondering, is this really for me?
That's a really good question. If they're wondering, is it for me? Then they're already, there's already something, there's already a pull. Presumably already something is activated in them, and they're asking that question. So then I'd say, well, you just got to go and try it out and give yourself that time to see whether it's for you. But I'd say if you're drawn to wanting to go a little deeper, wanting to feel more in touch with your own essence, to reconnect with your own truth, aliveness, then it's for you. Yeah, it's a very beautiful way of finding that replenishment.
How can people find this over the world? Like, how do people find, if they're not really ready to do it on their own, how do they find somebody to do this with?
Well, there's quite a few people now offering forest bathing, whether they're calling it forest bathing or forest therapy. You can just go online and look for that, and there'll probably be someone in your area offering that.
You know, it's interesting. It's through our talk here, it's just by talking about going into the forest, being in the forest, I have the sense of relaxing and actually dropping in a way to myself. So that's quite magical that you can kind of tap into the forest just by talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's been really lovely. Thanks, Katarina, for having me on. It's been great.